So the thought and speech police are at it again down here in Australia, trying to cleanse our vocabulary of potentially dangerous words. Words we are told that lead to domestic violence. And remember,
the issue of family violence, or domestic violence as it's often called, which is just violence against women, which is the way I would prefer to describe it.
That's right, folks. Domestic violence is just violence against women. There's no such thing as male victims of domestic violence. They don't exist, according to our Prime Minister. Guide wants phrases like man up and two to tango banned for being sexist. Have you ever told a boy to man up or called a girl a princess? No, I haven't, but don't let that stop you from pretending that there's an epidemic of people doing that and that it leads to domestic violence.
Which is just violence against women.
A language guide designed to expose hidden meanings in common phrases wants a ban on sayings including boys will be boys and it takes two to tango. The Excuse Interpreter, released as part of the government's $30 million Stop It at the Start campaign against domestic violence,
which is just violence against women,
claims that certain expressions absolve disrespectful behaviour towards young women. The pamphlet explains that he picks on you because he likes you, sends the message to girls that they shouldn't get upset when boys insult them, and tells boys such behaviour is okay. So this isn't new. The Stop It at the Start campaign was launched at this time last year with a ridiculously biased ad campaign. Let's go back in time and listen to what a younger me said about it.
You pop those down there. You're okay. Just did it because he likes you.
Okay, so what do we have here? Bad male behaviour? Check. Innocent, helpful, halo-wearing girl? Check. An unhelpful attitude by parent? Check. This parent really has failed here. You would at least ask that boy to watch what he's doing. And you know what? I think most parents probably would. And I wholeheartedly agree with that guy. The whole ad is just a series of incidents that show angry, aggressive white men and innocent women victims, which is strange since we know that most domestic violence is two-way violence, and Indigenous men are much more likely to be perpetrators. But don't expect to see any of those incidents in the ad. Oh yeah, and that ad, which has been seen on YouTube more than 500,000 times, was so popular that they disabled the thumbs up and thumbs down. That's not typical at all, is it? It says comments such as he's going through a phase and he didn't know he was doing anything wrong, accept aggression as just part of being a boy. Well, that kind of depends on what the kid has done, but of course, random quotes with no context suit the narrative. And I'd like to know who's saying those things and how often. But unfortunately, I don't think we're going to get the data on that. So let's have a look at the Excuse Interpreter. Discover the hidden meanings of common expressions that can excuse disrespectful behaviour towards girls. So start with the premise that disrespectful behaviour only occurs towards girls. And if it does occur towards boys, well, that's not important. The issue, violence against women. Because remember, violence against men is not an issue because it doesn't happen.
Which is just violence against women.
Most Australians agree violence against women is wrong. We know that. On average, one woman is killed every week at the hands of a current or former partner. And you can see they give you little footnotes where these numbers come from. So this one comes from the Australian Institute of Criminology, and they looked at homicide over a 2-year period from 2010-2011 to 2011-2012. And 83 women were victims of intimate partner homicide. So that's about one woman every 9 days, which is not quite as catchy as one woman a week, is it? And just in case you were wondering, which you probably weren't because it doesn't matter, one man every 28 days is a victim of intimate partner homicide. And more than a quarter, or 27% of intimate partner homicides for that period occurred in Indigenous communities, whilst Indigenous people make up just 3% of the total population. But that's obviously not worth mentioning either. 1 in 3 women has been a victim of physical or sexual violence since the age of 15 from someone known to them. And that links to the ABS Personal Safety Survey. Now, the great thing about being me is that I've looked at those surveys already and made some pretty graphs. So if you take all violence and threats of violence into account, approximately 4 women out of 10 have been a victim of some form of violence in their lifetime, and 5 out of 10 men. But that's not important, because domestic violence,
which is just violence against women,
1 in 6 women has experienced physical or sexual violence from a current or former partner. Now that one is actually correct, after years of being misreported. Again, I addressed this in a previous video. Now just going back to that claim about more than 1 in 3 women will experience violence at the hand of their partner. As far as I can tell, that claim first showed up in the ABC's 7:30 report back in 2008, and subsequently picked up by the media and gleefully parroted by politicians and domestic violence advocates. Now I couldn't locate the video, but you can see a copy of the transcription on the ABC 7:30 report website. The thing to note here is the asterisk, and if we go down to the bottom of the page, we find out why it's there. The words "or former partner" were added after broadcast to accurately reflect the research on which this statistic is based. Now it's important because the way it was actually reported when the show was aired was, more than 1 in 3 Australian women will experience violence inflicted by their partner at some point in their lifetime. Well, according to the same personal safety survey, the chances of a woman experiencing violence from a current partner is approximately 1 in 37 in their lifetime. But even when you add in previous partners, it comes out to 1 in 6. Now that correction was made to the transcript more than a year after the show aired, so the damage had already been done. 1 in 4 Australian women has been emotionally abused. That one is also correct, and the number of men reporting emotional abuse is 1 in 7. And of course, men are less likely to report any type of domestic violence, so take that with a grain of salt. Interestingly, in the notes, nagging is excluded from the numbers unless it was perceived to cause emotional harm or fear. Now, maybe you think that's fair enough, but feminist lobbyists have successfully managed to include the silent treatment, withholding affection, and criticism over not doing household chores as guidelines for judges to consider in recognising emotional abuse. 1 in 4 young people is prepared to excuse violence from a partner. Now, this one I find particularly interesting as it comes from a survey called Young Australians' Attitudes to Violence Against Women. Not attitudes towards violence, but violence towards women. So they don't ask what attitudes are towards excusing violence against men. Because as I suspect, and have reported on this channel probably half a dozen times, attitudes towards violence against men are worse than those against women, which is a little inconvenient for the narrative. Here it is again, if you haven't heard it before. Now, as I've detailed many times in previous videos, exhaustive research was carried out by the Australian government and published in 2001 on the attitudes towards violence of young people ages 12 to 20 years old, both violence in general and towards the opposite sex. And the report showed that when talking about violence in general, males thought it was more acceptable to use violence in a number of scenarios. For example, this question: it's not always wrong to hit someone, sometimes they provoke it. 62% of males either definitely or generally agreed with that statement, whereas only 42% of females agreed. Also, 30% of males agreed with the statement that it may not be right, but threatening to hit someone gets you what you want, whereas 19% of females agreed. Then when it comes to dating violence, in response to the statement, it's all right for a guy to hit his girlfriend if she makes him look stupid in front of his mates, 7% of males agree and only 2% of females. However, the statement, when a girl hits a guy, it's really not a big deal, 19% of females agree with that statement. But of course, those are two different questions, so it's difficult to compare those raw numbers exactly. But what happens when the same questions are asked about males and females? Here we have levels of agreement with statements about the use of violence against females. For example, we can see that 6% of both males and females surveyed think that the male is right to or has good reason to hit her if she refuses to have sex with him. And when the roles are reversed, 10% think it's okay for her to hit him. And this is the pattern for every scenario. Both sexes think it's more acceptable for women to hit men, and the disparity is quite significant for a number of items. For example, 13% think he's justified in hitting her if she calls him useless or good for nothing, whilst 26% think it's justified when the roles are reversed. 38% think he's justified in hitting her if she hits him first, but 60% think she's justified when the roles are reversed. Now, unfortunately, the male and female responses are lumped together, but the authors note on page 78 that while the relative acceptability of hitting in these situations may be similar for males and females, the absolute levels reported are quite different, with female-to-male violence being considered more appropriate or justifiable than male to female for each situation measured. A significantly larger proportion of respondents considered that a violent response by a woman either to be her right or to constitute a good reason to do so for all but the first three items. This apparent disparity in what is deemed to be appropriate behaviour by gender is noted across all subgroup analysis. Males and females are more likely to say a woman is right to or has good reason to respond to a situation by hitting than a man in the same situation. So in simple terms, women think it's more appropriate to hit men than men think it's appropriate to hit women in the exact same circumstances. Now, if anything, this study highlights the falsity of government claims that domestic violence is all about disrespecting women, which if you have even a passing acquaintance with the causes of domestic violence, you'll already know has far more to do with social and economic disadvantage. And so it's obvious the whole narrative is specifically designed to exclude male victims of violence from the debate. It's easy to demonstrate that violence against women is a big problem if you cherry-pick and misrepresent statistics about women and exclude any discussion about men. And so the excuse interpreter is just more of the same. It doesn't address excuses made for disrespectful female behaviours, only male, because we've already established that violence against women is all that matters. And girls are all innocent, halo-wearing angels, and boys are inherently toxic. And not only that, a lot of these examples aren't necessarily disrespect. It comes down to the different ways males and females bond and interact. For example, lighten up. It's only a bit of fun. It's just a joke. Now, it's a well-established behaviour of boys that teasing, banter, and generally giving each other crap is part of male bonding. And of course, that can go too far and end up in bullying, but mostly it's a healthy part of male behaviour and bonding. Girls bond differently, and so a lot of the time girls will react more defensively than accepting of male behaviour. And so sometimes it's actually okay to say, look, he's only joking. And the boy learns that this particular girl doesn't like it, so he moves on. But no, you see, we can't recognise that there are differences between boys and girls. And since girls are perfect, we must eradicate male behaviour and make them conform to female standards. Take a look at this section. Blaming girls. Sometimes we shift the blame when a boy is disrespectful or aggressive towards a girl. This may imply that she must have done something to provoke the behaviour or manipulated the situation. It takes two to tango. She probably provoked him. Yeah, I hate to break it to you. Sometimes girls provoke mean comments from a guy with one of their own. It's called reality. And these attitudes aren't necessarily bad. They're actually born out of experience. The Partner Abuse State of Knowledge Project, which has examined 12,000 studies of domestic violence, concluded that 58% of intimate partner violence was bidirectional, or in other words, men and women having a go at each other. Again, context matters. Then, of course, there is the attempt to eliminate any criticism of women. She's such a bossy boots. She's a feisty one. It never seems to occur to these idiots that someone being called bossy is because, well, they're bossy. And whilst that may be gender specific, how many women do you hear referred to as arrogant pricks or a wanker? And how many men run around whining about it? This is just an attempt to close down any criticism of women. But of course, all this is secondary to the question, what does this actually do to address domestic violence? I think Jeremy Samet has a good answer. Centre for Independent Studies Senior Research Fellow Jeremy Samet told news.com.au, people who think our biggest problem is policing language need to take their social conscience for a walk. He said the guide was tokenistic and would have little effect on men who might go on to be violent towards their partners. Everyone agrees language should be respectful, but whether you're dealing with the issue that drives domestic violence is the debate we should be having. The idea you can change attitudes with linguistic retraining and turn them into this generation of new age guys is ridiculous. Dr. Samet said we should prioritise other issues, such as people blaming mental illness or drug use for their behaviour. We tend to address the lowest hanging fruit of language and attitudes, creating domestic violence. It becomes a way for people to virtue signal, the equivalent of wearing a ribbon. And that's right, it's the appearance of doing something without actually doing anything useful. I don't think attitudes are irrelevant. Good parenting and role models are essential. But how about addressing the major risk factors, which are demographics? Mark Latham once said that if you want to wage a war on domestic violence, you should be waging a war on poverty, because that's where high rates of domestic violence exist. The key example being Indigenous communities. Now, we live in a society where girls outperform boys at school and are going on to university in increasing numbers. This is not only celebrated, but backed up by government-funded programs, for example, to get more women into STEM fields, despite there being no barriers to them doing so on their own. Meanwhile, boys struggle and no one seems to care. On top of that, they're told their behaviour is inherently problematic, that girls are the gold standard of behaviour, that boys need to respect girls more. Girls, on the other hand, are not told to respect boys at all. So what is the effect going to be on a generation of young men that have been overlooked and underperforming in the education system and told that their behaviour is inherently toxic? Is that likely to breed understanding or resentment? I guess we'll find out. So is all this social engineering producing more respectful kids, or is it just privileging one sex over another? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. See you next time.